All right, thank you, Nate. Thanks for joining us, everyone. So as Nate said, I'm Dave Martin, and we are here with this talk as part of this larger project called What's in a Landscape that Art in Residence that we are doing with the Museum of Art and History, supported by a grant from the California Arts Council.
What's your body?
I already know it.
So, hi everyone, if we could, keep our cameras, keep muted. Nate will be on the manning the mute button there, I'm sure too. So as I was saying, this is part of a bigger project called What's in a Landscape, but in particular, Robin and I are leading a workshop for Quartz Hill High School students. And it's kind of a workshop on documentary filmmaking. So we'll start here with some introductions. As I said, my name's Dave Martin. I'm a visual artist, and my practice includes both moving image and film, as well as sculpture and installation. I'm also one of the co-founders of Art in Residence, which, as Nate kind of mentioned, we're a Lancaster-based nonprofit with the mission of exploring arts in the Antelope Valley. Robin, if you just take a quick minute here and introduce yourself, please.
I am Robin Rosenthal. I'm a documentary filmmaker. My husband and I make films as Pony Highway Productions. We're based here in Little Rock. Most of our work is character driven, and we generally tend to work with groups of people that are part of a close-knit community of one kind or another. That idea of working in community and embedding in community has also served me well in the public practice work that I do. I lead a creative placekeeping project called Real 93543, also here in Little Rock. A funny story that I want to tell before we start showing our work is that when at the end of another meeting that we were involved in, I remember asking Dave to explain the impetus for this project. And he brought up an essay called The Meaning of the Landscape, and asked me, I think as if this person was pretty obscure, whether I had ever heard of the artist Rackstraw Downs. And weirdly, Rackstraw Downs was one of my teachers in art school. So I promptly went out and bought this book, The Meaning of the Landscape, that has been very instrumental in Dave's thinking about this entire project. Recognized lots and lots of characters in it who were other teachers of mine from the sort of New York School of Painting. And it was just that kind of serendipity that lets you know that you're in the right place. Mm-hmm. So I think, Dave, you're going to take it from here.
Yeah, I do. And I think, serendipity is I feel like that describes a lot of the way that Robin and I have been able to work with each other over the past couple of years, just sort of being in the right place at the right time. But yeah, in particular, there was this one essay called "The Meaning of the Landscape" by Rackstraw Downs, and the point of it is sort of this: that the landscape is permeated with meanings, and it goes on to say that, you know, a naturalist, a geologist, meteorologist, a local historian, a real estate agent, a farmer, all of these folks sort of read the landscape and see things that a casual observer does not see. But also natives of rural areas, quote, old timers, see all of those things and instinctively, sort of without the aid of book learning. And I think for me, and I'll start off by kind of going through a little bit of my work here and how landscape plays a role in the work that I do and kind of in the way that I think about making art and so forth. And, you know, a lot of the work that I had done in the past was figurative work, but I'd always been, you know, kind of intellectually really interested in the relationship between like phenomenology and semiology. So, you know, how words kind of come to mean certain things or have certain meanings, but then also, you know, from a phenomenological side, how things kind of exist in the world, and that, you know, you can't really break down the use of a word just by its meaning, right? How it also kind of is used and exists in the world is important to it. And so I thought this was a really interesting way to think about landscape, kind of a genre of art that I hadn't really had a lot of interest in until I think really it was when, you know, I started working with Nathaniel, and we kind of started coming up with the ideas for art in residence. You know, because being in the Antelope Valley, you know, there are so many different uses of landscape that you can just see, you know, very much on the surface. You know, because of the desert, because it's kind of surrounded by hills, you know, it's very easy to see all of these things. And so, you know, I think I got interested in pursuing this as a line of work. And so for the past couple of years, really, I've been kind of focusing on landscape work, even though it came for me kind of as a surprise in some ways. So what I wanted to start by sharing here were just a couple of clips of some projects. So my background is I grew up kind of always doing art. Classically trained as a filmmaker. So my undergrad and my grad school were both in you know, more traditional Hollywood-based, you know, cinematic filmmaking practice. But it, in a lot of ways, doesn't quite, you know, encapsulate everything that I've wanted to do with my practice. And so I think drawing and sculpture has, you know, become something I've really been getting back into more so recently. And particularly, I think where these things really started to come together was the first project that Nate and I did with Art in Residence. It was an installation called Then Now a Dream. And Nate and I made 4 life-size pronghorn antelope sculptures. We put them out on our property out by the Poppy Reserve, and they eventually were purchased by the city and now have kind of a forever home in the Prime Desert Woodland Preserve in Lancaster. So let me get to this sort of video clip here.
I went to
sorry, hang on. There we go. And so what we're seeing here is the documentation film for this. So, you know, the sculptures went out into the field in early 2019, and they are painted this kind of ghostly blue that is sort of suggested of the future. The figures themselves, these antelopes, these pronghorn antelopes, kind of represent things that were in the landscape at one time. And then the material that we used to build this was rebar, kind of zip ties, and trash. So things that we actually found kind of in the landscape at present. So, you know, in this way, the sculptures were kind of referencing both, you know, the history, the present, and the potential future of this landscape. And so with the documentation film here, I wanted to capture something that you couldn't get just from visiting the installation once. You know, I think that is what is really special and unique about sculpture, is being able to walk around it. You know, you kind of set your own experience of it in time and in space. But what I did through the film, and this is a very kind of abridged version of the longer one, was went out over the course of several days, both at the beginning of the installation, when the sculptures were kind of brand new and fresh, and then a little bit towards the end of the exhibition as well, when they're covered, you know, in bird droppings. The paint had faded a little bit, and they certainly showed some of the wear and tear from being out in the field for that long. So, you know, there I think capturing light and time in a really specific way is something that you can do with film and with the motion picture. And so, you know, I think for me, this particular piece was really instructive in figuring out a relationship between sculpture and filmmaking, these two parts of my practice that were always kind of separate from each other. let's see, then the next little sample here that I wanted to show is, I think by way of then getting into my kind of present work, which is another sculptural installation out on the property, but that I think demonstrates some of the, I guess we can call them more graphic interests in landscape, and just in sort of my practice in general. So this particular piece, and again here I'm just pulling out about 1 minute of just some sort of representative clips from it. It's called Landscape with Flare Stack and Birds. And so this one is from some footage that I shot, I think it was back in 2012. And so the home video elements of it for me are these kind of like elements of memory in the piece. And taking these two clips of one of these birds that I filmed in Karn City, Texas, and some video of this flare stack that's also in Karn City, Texas, and trying to make some sense out of this object that was in the landscape, this flare stack, that had both a personal meaning to me. So this particular flare stack is on some property that my grandfather owned, and so Karn City is in South Texas, and as maybe some of you are familiar with, there was a big oil boom there over the past couple of years, I guess over the past decade now. And for me, I think this piece was always about trying to make sense, not just of the landscape, but of things that are in the landscape. So this flare stack being on the one hand, maybe a symbol of environmental degradation, right? Our kind of over-reliance on fossil fuels and all of the trouble that has led to in our world. But at the same time, so much of our world exists and it is so dependent on fossil fuels. And also, the way that this worked out, my grandfather, who was always a man of very, very modest means, died a millionaire and was able to provide for his family, and kind of my mother now has a solid inheritance and was able to retire. So these kind of duplicities, for me, these multiple meanings of trying to reconcile maybe like the larger sense of what these things mean, but then also, to individuals and to economies and to communities, right? These things can also be sort of, beneficial. And I think the writings of Rackstraw Downs, again, that idea of looking at all of these meanings and not necessarily trying to come to a final judgment about any particular meaning of landscape, but really just sort of appreciating them, the landscape for all of its this kind of multivalent meanings, was very influential to me. And I think that helped me kind of finish this piece, which took me almost, almost the better part of a decade to kind of finally finish this off. And again, formally here, right, there's, this way of trying to make sense of it by breaking it down into these almost, very, very simple graphic shapes that are almost become very symbolic and almost kind of like language in the way that they are abstracted, but never getting too far away from the direct sort of memory, right? The home video aspect of it, that's in this in this as well. And so then for me, this is the last couple of things that I will share here with you all. Kind of brings me to my current work. It's called Landscape Frame. There's a couple of little small videos of it. So it's out on the Art in Residence property right now, and it's a 10-foot wide by 7-foot tall steel frame that, as you can see, turns around its axis. And so viewers are invited to approach the sculpture, to turn it, to kind of frame up different views of the landscape, you know, and take pictures on it. You can sit on the frame, you can kind of interact with it. And so, you know, for me as a, on the one hand, the sculpture acts as a graphic object, as kind of a pictorial object, being a frame in the landscape, but also in a phenomenological way, right? It's an object in the landscape, and that you are kind of physically interacting with. And so I think, you know, for me, it's embracing those two things, but also where this is kind of out on our property. And why I think it is such an interesting place for this is because, you know, if you look one way out on this property, what you see is the poppy reserves. So one use of the landscape where it's being preserved for hiking, you know, kind of for its physical beauty. But as you turn the frame and as you kind of turn around on this landscape, right, if you look other ways, you can see where there's been mining, you can see resources, windmills, you know, solar farms. You can see the more urban center of Lancaster kind of on the horizon in one way. And then if you look the other, it is just kind of farmland the other way. So, you know, whereas I think with the piece that we just saw, the landscape with the flare stack and the birds, there's a lot of manipulation to the video there. And I think what this represents for me is a way of trying to make some very minimal kind of a gesture with the sculpture, and it pointing to, you know, all of these different meanings. So then over the summer, as this is up, I'll be kind of exploring with video more of those different meanings of landscapes, and, you know, capturing more footage of what, you know, is kind of around this landscape and around the Antelope Valley. So let me stop sharing here. You know, again, this whole project here, it's called What's in a Landscape. And I think for, you know, for me, it's about finding these different meanings, right? These different reads of what's in the landscape. But also a lot of different kind of graphic potential, right? Different ways of making images out of what's in the landscape. And, you know, I think for me, art really is a process about, you know, making sense and making meaning in the world. And, you know, kind of that's what I find in a landscape, is all of these graphic possibilities related to these different meanings. So, Robin, I'll kind of, you know, put that question to you. I mean, what is it that you in your practice, what do you find in a landscape?
I will answer that for me, what's in a landscape in my filmmaking practice so far has been the people. I just want to say before I move on to that, I think your frame is going to lend itself so well to being filmed and videotaped. It's exactly what you're saying about it being a very simple intervention. It's full of possibility. You know, I've seen some of the things that you've put recently on Instagram, what you sent out the other day with the overhead circle thing. I love the combination of this simple frame and all the sort of play and fun that you can have with it. I'm also really intrigued by the smokestack piece, or not smokestack, the flare piece, the gas flare. And the combination that you found of bringing your own memory and thoughts and feelings to it in this graphicized way, and combining the home movies and the real landscape with this very graphic overlay. I think it's really an interesting way of working.
Oh, thank you.
So back to the idea of people in the landscape. As filmmakers, for Bill and I, we feel like to tell the whole story of our characters, we need to discover and be attuned to their place in the landscape that we meet them in. So that can involve looking at how do they use the land, how is the land a part of their story, how are they interacting with the land, how are they feeling about the place where they find themselves. And then how do the features of the landscape, including weather, act on them or affect them? And then in the filmic realm, how can we use the landscape cinematically or metaphorically to reflect the mood or the psychology that we come to understand about our characters or the place in life that they're in as we're filming that. Dave is gonna put up my clips for me because my internet here in Juniper Hills is too sucky. So this first clip, just to set it up, it's old 4:3 before everything was in HD, and it's also a file made from a tape. So it's a little funky in terms of quality. The context is, this is a traveling tent circus. The film is called Travels with Tarzan. This is a clip from, they're traveling every 2 to 3 days and setting up a giant tent every 2 to 3 days. So this is just after they have finished in their first town after coming out of their winter quarters near Joplin. And they have torn down the tent. They've been a little bit worried about the potential of wind in this sort of tornado alley part of our country. And this is them coming into the next town. So it's about 2 minutes.
Oh, you never get rich. Son of a bitch. You're in the circus now.
In the middle of nowhere. Hey, Paco, I'm gonna write a letter tonight, man. And if anything happens to me, send it to my mom. I'm out in the country, nowhere to go. I didn't even see a Kentucky Fried Chicken here, so you know ain't no blacks here. You ain't gonna be able to see all this damn dust.
No, what worries me is such an open area here. It really worries me. And especially this time of year, you know, you never know.
Forklift!
It's circus time, and surely you know that by now. Let me start again. 1. And surely you know it's circus time. It's going to be a beautiful day, so we hope you come out and see all new
Ready to get to the next town. There's got to be an oasis next to this. It's awful. Too much wind, too much dirt. Dust Bowl, USA.
Okay, so pardon the steppiness, that's just from playing it through Zoom. But so you can see a lot of things here about how different characters have different concerns about the openness of this landscape. The driver, Jerry, talks about being Black in the middle of nowhere. One of the circus owners is concerned that it's such an open area, and then that sort of ominous music brings in this wind. So this is a situation where they cannot even get the tent put up in time. The wind is blowing everything, and then by the time they're tearing the tent down, it's a full-on dust storm. So this weather episode, in a place like Tornado Alley, has a lot to say about the fortitude of the people themselves. These are people who are resilient, humorous, Dust Bowl USA, taking everything in stride. So it was an important scene for us because it told a lot about the character of these people who do this kind of job of taking a circus all through the country, whatever they may find, and setting up in these open field kind of situations. Also, just personally for us, this is the point where we found acceptance for the kind of immersion that we were doing here, because up until this point, usually when you start in on a film where you're kind of embedding yourself, people don't really understand the concept that you might be with them for a long time, observing them, and they think of you more like a news crew, so you'll approach them with a camera. In this case, they were used to having to fight organizations like PETA and give them sound bites about the good animal care that their animals were getting in this circus. So when we were out there, basically ruining the camera that we were using in that dust storm and having to send for another camera, one of the circus owners' wives said, when we complimented them on what they were doing out there in the dust, she said, well, you're not on any picnic either. So that was the start of being able to really settle in and make the kind of film that we wanted to make. The next 3 short clips are from the documentary Mariposas del Campo that we are making now. You're getting kind of a sneak peek of 3 little scenes. This is about to go for technical finish at the end of the month. So it's not color graded yet. It's not sound mixed yet. It's going to be steppy just because we're in Zoom, but you'll get the idea. What we're going to play first is the opening of the film, actually.
Tu idioma, tu música, Radio Indígena 94.1 FM. Chavindota Soto Radio Indígena Kumishiko Kumi.i FM.
I've started working in the field since I was 14. My mom works in the fields. My dad also works in the fields.
I started working in the strawberry fields during the summer, and I started doing that as a 13, 14-year-old because I saw my parents working there. Most of the families work in the strawberry fields.
My first job in the fields was actually beets.
Cutting tomatoes?
In the chili?
My older brother Rufino has worked, my sister Lydia has worked, my sister Brissy has worked there, and Alex have worked there. So kind of we all work there.
We are predetermined to have a destiny, for us to be in the agricultural fields, busting our butts for $2.70, but we're not invisible anymore.
Okay, so Mariposas del Campo, which means butterflies from the field or of the field, is about a group of teenagers who are from indigenous pueblos in Oaxaca, and their families work the strawberry fields nearby in Oxnard. So the landscape here is the setting of their lives. So the film starts with that, and you have this kind of blur of landscape where everything runs together, which is kind of the life of getting up every morning at 5 in the morning and going to work in the fields. You get to see a little bit of what the families do, what the work entails, and the place where they do it. And this opening sort of establishes the strawberry fields as the place of their lives, basically. The next clip I will set up as Dave loads it. This is from much further on in the movie, where one of the main characters has left the familiar home setting of Oxnard, where there are many indigenous families living. It's a large indigenous farm worker community there, and she is attending school in Berkeley. So we'll play the clip and then I'll talk about it.
I'm very lonely. I often catch myself doing homework alone, eating alone. Even in undocumented space in this campus, when I tell them I'm from Mexico, it's like, but you're not really from Mexico because you don't look like you're from Michoacan or Zacatecas, you don't look like a Chicano, whatever that means. I know where I'm actually from. Like, I'm from San Jorge, Nuchita, Oaxaca, Mexico. And I'm from Oxnard, and like, that's where I was raised and that's where I have all my memories. But at the same time, I'm not even from there. I'm from Oaxaca, but I don't even know Oaxaca. And so it's just interesting to explore and to figure out where I'm actually from, like from a place that I actually don't know, where a place that I don't know the language, I don't know my grandmother, and it's like I don't belong here either.
Okay, so that the character is Litzy, and the landscape, and again, to use the word serendipity, she actually led us to that place. You know, after we did some interviewing with her, finding out how things were going at school and everything, we said, is there any place you would like to take us? And she said that she often went to this hilltop in the Berkeley Marina, and you can see San Francisco across the bay. And it just, you know, for us, it was like, wow, you know, what she's talking about is exactly sort of being reflected in this kind of lonely, singular hilltop where it looks like she's between two worlds, just like what she's talking about. You know, she's reflecting on her loneliness, on her isolation, on not being in the more sort of colorful and cultural atmosphere of Oxnard, basically caught between two worlds at this point, you know, seeing the big city of San Francisco across the bay and hearing her yearning for a place to belong. So that was sort of a piece of luck that was the place that she led us to. One last clip. I'll set it up while Dave sets it up. At this point in the film, the clip that we're going to see is during a time when the various characters are thinking about their college choices. It's kind of been hammered into them that the way to improve the situations of their families is the path to higher education. And so they are weighing their choices, thinking about what's possible, how they can remain helpful to their families, which is very important in this particular community. And this character, Flavio, he lives on the very land where his family farms. They have a house on that farm. So let's play the clip and then I'll talk about it.
Middle school that was isolated by strawberries. $3, ma'am. I went to an elementary school that was surrounded by houses. My high school was surrounded by strawberries. At Oxnard College, it's the same thing. It's a small school, much like my high school and my middle school and my elementary school. So that process of going from something that was relatively small to a school that's medium to large, it's scary. It's scary. More people. City. It's not something I'm accustomed to. I grew up with this piece of vegetable with a cow. I've been to UCLA, and that's just in the middle of the city. That's everyone walking and driving, and that, I think that school is the most intimidating. And I don't know, I really hope I do get accepted there though.
So this is something that probably most of us didn't think about when we thought about our college choices, you know, that what our comfort level was about going to school in a city versus being, you know, in this very sort of insular farmland environment. You know, when he says, I grew up with the kale, he's actually slightly fearful about moving out beyond that kind of world, and yet wanting to push himself to go to the city and to go to UCLA. The farmland is really has become part of his inner being and his psyche. This is where he is comfortable. So this is illustrative of his conflict that's, you know, throughout his character's journey in the film, this kind of push and pull. So to have him, again, you know, sometimes it's luck when you're there filming and people say something wonderful that encapsulates and picks up a piece of kale that kind of encapsulates their central dilemma. So in our coda to the end of the film, we actually learn how this inner conflict played out. But yeah, every time we talked to him, it was pretty much in the fields like that. And sorry about the step. Yes, you will have to wait and see. Sorry about the steppiness of these films. But so I would say that for me, in the instances of these clips that I've shown, the landscape is both reflects on and also is a vital part of the character makeup of some of the characters. It's a kind of a symbiotic relationship that you can feel. We would not understand these things if we filmed them, you know, in a sort of a high-end lit interview situation away from their natural landscapes. It was sort of imperative to see these people in their landscapes. They don't live in a vacuum. We don't live in a vacuum. So that's kind of the relationship of landscape to the work that I've been doing in film.
Okay. Yeah, I find I think you mentioned it specifically with the first clip, you know, the idea of acceptance and all of these things as you're with these folks, you know, day in and day out. What do you find that there is usually kind of a moment where this happens? Like at the end of a project, are you able to look back and say, you know, that was our windstorm moment kind of thing?
Not always a moment like that. I mean, that one was clear as a bell, you know, to be told, well, you're not on a picnic. You know, they realize, gee, you're working hard and, you know, you must care about what you're doing and you're spending a lot of time with us. I think for others, it's just more of a slow process because like in this particular film, which is the fourth of the these types of films that we've made, we had 8 different characters. So, and they weren't always together the way they are in a circus or in some of our other films, like a particular stable of racing horses or a particular team. Those situations, you can read that a little bit more. But in this one, we were sort of going back and forth between 8 different characters. So it was a little harder to tell in each instance when that moment was, you know, like, oh, you want to come again? You want to talk to me again? You're going to show up there? You know, it takes a while to dawn on people what we're actually doing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think for everybody here, that's kind of the end of our sort of formal presentation. So we wanted to leave some time here at the end for some questions for myself, for Robin, for the two of us. So I think at this point, I believe you are free to unmute yourself, so feel free. Or any questions, we will take those in the chat as well.
I'd like to just comment on the film, Robin, the way when you're immersed into the fields, that was great. It brought right up to our personal experience of what they're going through, I liked that film. I liked the way you constructed that.
You mean in the beginning or
there's the scene where you're right in the fields, in the strawberry fields, and you see the leaves surrounded by it. I love that. Immersed in it.
Yeah. Believe it or not, that's very hard to get in there. People, farm owners do not want you filming in the strawberry fields. So we got very, very lucky to find a person that would let us in there to get those, really tight close-up shots of what it looks like when they're going down a row and pulling strawberries.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Dave, can you talk a little bit about your software on that one piece of the gas?
Oh, sure.
Play?
So that was all After Effects.
After Effects? Okay.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. I mean, it's so seamed so well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is a mix of After Effects, some Photoshop, but certainly in the kind of like motion graphics and design language. That's also kind of my background. Like I said, my training was more as kind of a classically trained filmmaker in cinematography and in post-production and in editing.
Okay.
So a lot of my work has been trying, or kind of conceptual struggles are taking some of those tools and using them for for other kind of purposes. Oftentimes with a motion graphic, the idea is to communicate something very clearly, in a short amount of time. And in some ways,
really?
I'm trying to communicate something, like communicate an ambiguity, I think, in some of those films.
I just went to a lecture from the Philosophical Research Society here, in LA. And it was a film that a very young guy who's just getting into filmmaking, but he's making a film called Hollywood. And it takes place at a certain part in Hollywood called Beechwood. And the whole film is about this area and how seers, philosophers, all different kinds of people came into this land, and the land always brought out these great thinkers. And then when the Hollywood industry came in, they left and they went to Ojai. So the whole thing is about how this land keeps renewing itself. And the gist of it is that the land never forgets. So if something happens to the land, it will destroy whatever's in its way or get rid of the bad feelings and come back to what it's originally supposed to be.
Yeah,
I like
think
that.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of another piece of work that Rob and I had both read called the Overstory by Richard Powers, which is about kind of that relationship between humans. And this one is really that book is really specifically about trees. But certainly, I think that thinking about the landscape as kind of a living organism, as a living entity with its own way of creating memory, right? Obviously, very different than how we do as as evolved apes. But yeah, absolutely.
I really
Highly
enjoyed
recommend
your stuff, you guys. It's great.
Thank you.
So
Hi.
I just have a quick.
I have something I'd like
Oh, yeah,
to.
go.
Can you hear me? First of all, I really want to compliment you both. The different ways that you're looking at landscape is really fascinating because it's unusual for the general public to even think about landscape in all those very different ways. And I'm really excited to see the film, Robin, because the way you guys get in there and, embed and talk to the people in such a personal way, it's such a, a glimpse into a whole nother life that none of us are, well, not me and most people are completely unaware of. And it's absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to see the finished product and get to know all of those people who you're so personal with. It's really so great. And then Dave, I just am really fascinated by that yellow frame that you have out there on the hillside. And you did say that people are encouraged to go out there and make their own videos, I think. Did you say that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's got me thinking.
Oh, great.
You know, what are the possibilities of being out there and doing something kind of crazy? I don't know. I've got to come up with something inspired.
Yeah. Just make sure you post
Yeah.
it so we can all see it. I'd love to.
Oh, for sure.
I think one of the things that, you know, why I was really interested to do this talk with Robin particularly is because our just moving images and our image making practices are so very different, right? Like I'm much more comfortable alone with After Effects, you know, drawing and painting and kind of thinking about these meanings and, you know, working through things on paper and pictorially. But I love watching documentaries like the kind that Robin make, and I have so much respect for filmmakers who can, you know, go out and do this and immerse themselves with people and be there day in and day out until, you know, that trust and that rapport is established, you know, and get these really personal stories. I just, you know, like I said, I have a lot of respect and admiration and a lot of enjoyment for it too. So. Yeah.
Marta, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very inspired by, of course, both of you are amazing, wonderful, but I feel as a French person, and also because I live in Venezuela, so I was very, it caught my attention a lot, what you were doing, Robin, and to me it has to do with the question that sometimes people ask me, where are you from? Where are you from? And so what you are showing in your Mariposa del Campo is that, okay, for most people, if you are in a place, you belong to the place. So how long have you been there? Well, you know, my grandmother, my great-grandmother was there. I have been here I was born there. But it's much more complicated than that, much more complicated. Because, for example, in the second clip, this girl, you know, she's been in Oxnard all the time, but she's not being accepted, but the fact that she doesn't look like the people who live in that place. So there seems to be some type of interconnection between whether it is justified that you really belong to that place, because it's not only the place, but it's your history or even your facial or your physical traits. And I thought that was very interesting, this idea, because also you talk about that she doesn't know. I think it's about belonging. What does it mean to belong? So where are you from? What does it mean to belong to a place? And then it's justified. Are you a true American? What does it mean, all that? Is it the land? You know, so you ask all those questions. I thought it was extremely, to me, I'm going to think about it a lot. There is another thing also which I never thought about. Is, for example, when, in fact, when I came to the United States the first time, it was a very long time ago, I was 18 years old, and I used to live in a very small town in France, and to go to my grandfather's house, and I knew everything, you know, the land and all that. And when I came to Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, I was a little lost. So I think it's in the second or the third, you talk about the difficulty of this person who is used to a very small space. I think you say insular environment, and all of a sudden this person in UCLA, and this person is very intimidating. So we don't think about that. We don't think so. All those little things, and when I say little, I'm not saying that it's insignificant. No, I'm remembering what Derrida used to say. Look at the note at the end of the page. You know, the footnotes, and you say, oh, why should you look at footnotes? This is nothing. But you know, those are all those footnotes that are extremely important. So looking at at the landscape and the people from the footnote, I would say, perspective, I really think you did an amazing job. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about, but okay, I'm stop there. And also, Dave, I wanted to say, if I may say, you know, when I found out about the frame, I remember when I was in Venezuela, and this was in the 70s, and it's amazing, there were a lot of money, so they were doing some really cutting edge things. And one of the artists in the gallery in Caracas was hanging a lot of frames, and they were empty, just a frame, and some of them were gilded, and he would portray, you know, the character, for example, but he would do things that are very outrageous, quote unquote. For example, you would expect in this gilded frame to see a king or something. And what he did, he was brushing his teeth and he was spitting on people. So I thought it was absolutely great. I loved it because it's so unexpected. So when I heard about the frame, I was immediately, of course, I had not read what you said and everything, but I thought, so what does it mean, you know, to have that frame? And you explain that it's because there are different environment, different situation, and that's why it's very complex. When you look at, it's not the landscape, but it's many landscape. It's many. The city, you know, it's plural. So anyway, there's a lot to say about. Anyway, I want to thank you guys because it's so amazing to have people who provoke to think a little bit and not only talk about dogs and cats and the weather. So thank you so much. I'm really happy about that.
Can I say a little response to, you were talking about the young woman who's, you know, searching for a sense of belonging. Interestingly, the idea of what is indigenous, you know, is inherent in many of the things that she talks about her own indigenous background. There's another part in the film where she wonders, you know, can I really claim to be Mixteca because I don't speak the language? I can't tell a whole story about what it means to be Mixteca like some of these, maybe her other cohort can, who came a little bit later, and they came to this country speaking Mixteca. She came as a 1-year-old, right? So even though it's her heritage, even though she is dark skin and maybe looks like a Mixteca because of that, small stature, things like that, she knows she's missing something by coming at such a young age. But we followed her to something called the Encampment for Citizenship, which is out of Oakland, and they run a summer camp that's all about social justice for young people. And they come from cities all over the country, and they go to a different college every summer, to be housed there. And it's a whole program, like a 5 or 6 week program. When we were filming Litzy there, a Native American woman was leading one of the workshops there, all about what is indigenous. And there are other, you know, we think of indigenous as native, you know, Native American, native to a place, but there's a sort of another definition that the workshop leader brought up about how that you can become indigenous through your relationship to a place and to a landscape. And I think, let me just grab it because it's right here. I think I mentioned this book once before, but some of you might find it interesting. It's a writer named Paul Kingsnorth, and it's called Savage Gods. And it's sort of about his desire as a writer who often went and talked about indigenous cultures and the environment. So how they were losing land or resources that, you know, were part of their indigenous heritage. He sort of decided that he wanted to become indigenous in his own way, and he bought a landholding in Ireland and started farming it. And then the book is just a very philosophical meditation on his thoughts about the possibility or non-possibility of that, and also how it affected his writing. But I think this concept, especially in our present time when we talk about indigenous people and indigenous rights a lot, and it is very connected with place and landscape, it's interesting to explore the various ways of being Indigenous.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
I will read that book. Yeah, very.
Right. Well,
Any other?
we're just about at the hour. And I know, I mean, speaking of Indigenous, for those of you who don't know, the museum is hosting a talk right after this at 2 p.m. With artist Ken Marciano, who I think is the photographer of the current exhibition called the Future Generations Ride that's up at MOA right now. So if anybody is looking to get to that one, we'll be wrapping this one here up in just a minute here. Unless there are any other questions.
Nate, did you have something you were going to say earlier?
Oh no, I just wanted to thank the both of you for putting this on, and I wanted to tailor on what Stevie was saying about the different looks at landscape. You know, Dave comes from a more physical perspective of the landscape, and Robin, you come from a more cultural perspective of the landscape. But how both of those sides come in and inform each other through this talk has been a very unique experience, because you know, when I look at Dave's work by itself, right, I'm not focused on the people, but I'm focused on the objects within that space and the kind of identity that space all of a sudden starts to breed, you know, in my mind, or how I start to think about it. And then from Robin's perspective, it's more of a different kind of use of that landscape, and it's the people being involved in that landscape and thinking about the culture that then gets injected into the physical conditions or the geography, the physical geography of the area. So it was a great juxtaposition to have both of you there. But I don't have a question. I just had just that comment. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. I think as well a parallel thing here. You know, if we're through this conversation, if we have been able to see lots of different uses and meanings of landscape, I think for me, this conversation and looking at my work and Robin's work, you know, kind of side by side, also shows in a lot of ways the multiple possibilities of the moving image as a form of expression as well. So one of the other things I do is I'm an educator, and you know, one of my strong feelings about the moving image is that it is, I think, eventually, probably very soon, going to be as basic a skill, right, in using moving pictures as is just word processing. You know, being able to communicate with written language, being able to communicate with, you know, the photographic, the filmed image as well. And I think that looking at, you know, practices like mine and Robin's and seeing just how, you know, varied and how many uses the moving image can be put to, I think is also instructive.
Cool.
Any last thoughts, last questions?
I do have a question for Dave. How long is that frame going to be up? How long do we have to get out there and fool around?
Until August, till end of August.
August. Okay, good. Thanks.
We'll be up there for another about 6 months or so.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
Inspiring stuff.
Thank you so much for both of you. Wonderful. Very inspiring.
And yeah, Marta, as always, thanks for coming. Love seeing you here.
Thank you, Marta.
I wouldn't miss
it. I can't wait for everybody to see the film not going chugga, 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 chugga. So,
yeah, we'll have to do, we'll have to sponsor some kind of a screening of the film once it's finished.
Oh yeah.
We can,
yeah.